It's actually been a while since I've spoken about my teaching in a public forum, so I was delighted to have the opportunity to step back and think about what I've been doing for the past 10 years, which was another shock to realise I've been teaching first years that long. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is specifically, I've taught in different contexts, but I'm speaking specifically today about the teaching I've done with first year students, which I've been doing, as I say, for a decade, on information literacy. I'm from both an academic, I suppose, and a library background. Originally, I trained as a librarian, MLIS, and I worked in the library for several years, and then made my way back into academia, where I have been since. But I see myself on the nexus of those two, and I have a great love for the library profession, and my work on information literacy instruction has allowed me to really explore all of the different aspects of library work and education. So I'm delighted. So I'll just I suppose go over really. As I say, it's 10 years since I was first asked to teach first years. I've been doing other various forms of teaching, but in 2004, when I was up to my neck in lots of different things, including finishing my PhD, all sorts of things, my then professor at the time, Professor Mary Burke, who I'm sure a lot of you know, asked me would I put together a module, an information literacy module for first year students, because UCD at the time was undergoing a restructuring in terms of how the undergraduate programs were delivered, and it was moving to a modularized structure, as again I'm sure some of you know this already. So we took this as an opportunity to revamp our teaching and to look closely at what we could do for first years. And this was one of the outcomes of that restructuring, that we put together this module for first year undergraduates. And I'll be talking about the first incarnation of that and then how it's evolved over 10 years, which it has very much so past years. So I've also been involved in researching information literacy. It was the subject of my PhD a long time ago now. And I'm involved with in Philip's group, first of all, the working group for information literacy, now the task force for information literacy. So I've seen it from all sides, but it's really the teaching that I'm going to talk about today. So just to kind of set the scene, the context, what I will talk about. First of all, in keeping with the theme of what we're talking about today, I want to discuss, just to get us all on the same page, the best practices. What are the currently accepted best practices in supporting student learning? I try as much as I can, even though it's hard, to avoid talking about kind of teaching. I think from my perspective, my philosophy of teaching information literacy is that it's really about the student. The student comes first. So I kind of tried to flip it over. It's not easy to do because we're so, I suppose, used to talking about teaching and being directive that way. But I prefer, even mentally, just to flip it over and talk about the student, start with the student. And that's what I always tell the postgrads that I teach. Some of you might have been in my module at some point. We start with the student. So supporting student learning for information literacy is, I feel, the way we should try and think about it as much as possible. And other literacies, because I know information literacy is the term that we're using today, but I think it's fair to say that as a term, it's not, I suppose, under threat, but there are certainly other terms and phrases that are coming to the fore and are perhaps used a little more, such as digital literacy. Information fluency is also a term I hear quite a lot, which I actually quite like. I think it's a nice term. So information literacy, it still is, I suppose, the international currency, if you like, of this form of instruction, but I think other terms are starting to come to the fore as well, so we'll talk about that. I want to go back then in time to 2004 when I first started planning my first year information literacy module, and to talk about how I was, I suppose, restrained by the limitations of the time in terms of what the learning landscape looked like, the technologies that were available, and I suppose our knowledge and understanding of teaching and learning and how that could be planned. So that's obviously to set the contrast for what I did later on. And then I suppose the centre, the core part of my talk are the key changes that I've observed in that learning landscape. What are the issues and changes that have influenced how I then restructured my teaching? Because just in the past couple of years, we have done a huge restructuring of the module. It's virtually a new module. So I want to just talk about how that was influenced by what I observed over the years in the teaching and learning landscape. And then I'm going to explain to you how this module has changed and how it looks now and how I hope it'll look in the future if everything goes according to plan. Okay. So just first of all, the best practices. Now, I know a lot of you will be familiar with these. I'm sure you've maybe looked at some documents about this. Now, I'm not going to make any claims for this being definitive. I'm sure some of you would be able to, come up with your own. But as far as I can tell from reading about it, these are the currently accepted best practices in information literacy. So the first thing we have is, I suppose, a clear concept or definition of information literacy, or whatever term you're using, be that digital literacy, information fluency, information skills training, whatever it is that speaks to you the most. So a clear definition of that, understanding what it is that you are trying to do, to teach, what you want the students to be able to do. And you feed that into your mission statement and, as far as possible, align it with your institutional goals. It's from, I suppose, a political or strategic perspective, it's important to be able to do that. You're not out there on your own. You're working within an institutional context, so to align it with that. This has long been, I suppose, the hot topic around information literacy instruction. Embedded instruction or curriculum integrated instruction. And it's the importance of this is making the instruction meaningful in relating it to actual information needs that your students have, rather than just kind of throwing stuff at them and hoping that something is relevant or hoping that it's important. And this is a phrase that I use quite a lot, the teachable moment, that students are most receptive to the instruction that you are providing when they have a specific need that has to be satisfied. Okay, so you do this in an academic context, obviously, by integrating that with their actual curricula, tasks or assignments that they're doing at the time, and then it'll be more meaningful and they retain it more. They'll understand the relevance of it. Okay, so very important to clearly articulate your learning objectives. But what I think is even more important is the outcomes that the term that's generally used is intended learning outcomes, or ILOs, that you set to measure the outcome of your of the learning that you facilitated. Okay, have the students learned what you intended them to learn, and how are you going to measure that? What tasks are you going to set for them that will show they have learned what you wanted them to learn? So very important to do that. The next thing is multimodal learning activities aligned with the intended learning outcomes. Perhaps some of you are familiar with the term constructive alignment, possibly. It's a fairly hot topic. It's where you try to ensure that what you intend to do is aligned with the activities you've designed to support that, and then the outcomes that you want the students to achieve. There's no point in teaching something and then testing something else. Okay? Everything has to be pointed in the same direction, if you like. So you don't leave your assessment to the end, for example. You plan everything from the start. Your objectives, your learning activities, and your assessment practices all aligned and pointing in the same direction. Okay? So constructive alignment is the term there. It's important that your instruction is student-centered, that you find out what the students need or even want to learn, and the group attributes that you're dealing with. A lot of our groups of students now are very diverse in terms of culture, language, all sorts of different factors there. So to take time to consider that. And this is, I think, really important, that your learning context, the learning activities and situations that you set up for the students must be authentic. They must be situated. I suppose the best way to describe that would be in terms of problem solving. Okay? That you set up situations where students are required to solve problems, not generic sessions, that you don't just kind of decide for the students what it is they want to learn, that you find out what it is and figure out the best way, most authentic way of setting that up. Okay. That you have an active learning environment. I'm sure all of you are very familiar with that, rather than passive, and that's obviously where things are going at the moment, that the students are actually doing something in your class. Now, it's okay to listen sometimes, to be passive some of the time, but you should try to ensure that you have some active context in your teaching there, using the appropriate learning objects, whatever they are. We're spoiled for choice now with the learning objects we have. That you assess the actual learning, not just the satisfaction with the learning experience. Okay? That I think, because as certainly some of us who are librarians or we've been involved in information literacy teaching, we have found that we don't really have enough time, right, to assess our learning. And that's been a continual problem for certainly librarians who teach. And I think the tendency has been just to kind of hand out these satisfaction surveys at the end, which are fine. You know, it's, you get a sense of maybe what was going well, what wasn't going well. But I think it's very important to, if you can, as far as possible, assess learning. You know, this constructive alignment today, it's aligned with the learning activities and the learning outcomes, that you actually do some sort of assessment. That your programs or sessions or whatever they are scalable, adaptable and sustainable. Again, I think librarians in particular have sometimes suffered from the issue of, you know, something maybe works some year, people are involved, and then the next year it might just disappear because maybe some key personnel have moved away or some other factor has come into play. So I think it's been difficult to sustain information literacy teaching. Hopefully that's changing. I think it is. I think there's a lot more, I suppose, solid programs in different institutions now that go on year after year. It's important to be scalable too, different group sizes, and adaptable to whatever context you find yourself in with different groups of students, that you know you can work around that. And this was what my PhD was on those years ago, collaboration. That nowadays the idea of collaboration between stakeholders is even more important than ever before. That if you are a librarian, you must work with teachers, you must work with faculty members to embed your instruction in programs. Otherwise, you simply won't be able to do it. And then you have to work, obviously, with support services too, IT services. And if you don't have that expertise in-house, you find who you need to work with to get your programs off the ground. Okay. So again, I'm sure you could add something to these, but these, to my mind, are the key factors. That you're not going to get it totally right all of the time, but as far as possible, try and get it as right as you can within these. Okay. I'm just highlighting the ones that I suppose I will be talking about most in the rest of my presentation. What I consider the most important ones, I guess, just from the point of view where I am at the moment with this. So just go back. I want to talk about the learning landscape in 2004. You know, what did it look like and how has it changed over 10 years? You could probably all tell me how it's changed. But I suppose I really got a chance to sit back and think about, gosh, you know, it really was quite different back then when I started. And I really felt quite constrained, certainly by logistical things, but also by technology, but by my perception of students' abilities, for example, and then just by what was available at the time and what the current trends were. So just to go back to 2004, saying it doesn't sound that long ago, but it kind of is. When I started planning this module, I had to deal with unreliable classroom technologies. Obviously in UCD it's quite different now, but at the time you simply couldn't assume that you would have Wi-Fi, for example, in your classroom or in your lecture theatre. That you had to work on the assumption that it wasn't going to be there and plan for that. I know most of the rooms we used for tutorials at that point had overhead projectors still rather than smart boards and that. So it was not the best at the time. In 2004, Blackboard, I think, was maybe in use for about 2 years in UCD at the time. And we weren't really using it in a very inventive way. I think a lot of the tools, certainly the interactive tools, weren't available in the version we were using at the time. So, you know, we were just using it to post content and make announcements, that kind of thing, communicate with the students. But in a very tentative way, rather than looking at it as an enormous learning tool as we do today. So. There were obviously no smartphones at the time or tablets, so you know that's a good and a bad thing. Obviously, from the point of view of student distraction, they weren't all on their smartphones. But you know these are things we use and should use in our teaching. So it's been an interesting development there. In 2004, Web 2.0 was just an emerging concept. Tim O'Reilly had just kind of coined the phrase around that time, and nobody really knew what it was. It was just one of these buzz phrases that zipped around and people used them, but you know we didn't really understand what it was. Obviously now we do. Social networking was really only catching on. Obviously Facebook was developed in 2004, but it wasn't widely used for a couple of years after that. I think Bebo appeared in 2005, something like that. So it was only in its infancy, social networking. It wasn't like it was today. Twitter didn't appear until 2008, so you know, we wouldn't be tweeting from conferences at that stage. Social sharing services were just emerging, so bookmarking. Sharing slides, sharing videos, that kind of thing. They were there, but they weren't, as I say, widely used by, and least of all by students. So Wikipedia was, I think, around since 2000, 2001, right? But it was completely mistrusted as a source for academic work. You know, you simply did not permit your students to use Wikipedia or to include a Wikipedia reference in an essay, for example. It simply wasn't done at that time, and I think that's changing now. Personal blogging was not yet mainstream. The tools were there. I think WordPress was around, but they weren't as easy to use, as user-friendly as they are today. People hadn't gotten into it. There were political blogs, there were blogs, but there weren't the extent of personal blogging that's out there today. Simply wasn't around. So e-books were not widely adopted. They were there. E-readers hadn't taken off to the extent that they have today. I know now the majority of references I give to my students in terms of books are e-books. So it's a massive change, but at that time they weren't around. Searching across library e-collections was far less integrated than it was today. I know a lot of our libraries now have discovery services that search widely across the book collections, the journal articles collections, databases, that kind of thing. But at the time, they were quite separate. So we didn't have to consider that. And then a lot of what we did with the students was in hard copy. Okay? For example, the assessments that we gave were submitted in hard copy. I handed out hard copy worksheets, that kind of thing. So we were still back in, back then, no, it's all quite different today. And the incarnation of the module that I created at the time, Introduction to Information Literacy, it was brand new, and we were so lucky to have this opportunity to develop this. I mean, I couldn't believe my luck. I'd been writing about this and researching about, and it's the holy grail of being able to facilitate student learning information, a whole module all to myself. So I was asked to do it, and then I started thinking about it in 2004, and then we launched it for the first time, 2005, 2006. And it was great. It's a stage 1 module, okay? So we have students coming straight from secondary school. So we have this transition, during the transition period. It's a core module well, it was, still is, but our degree at the time was information studies. It's now information and social computing. It's still a core module for that. But it was also an elective module. So students from other disciplines were able to take it, which was also a new departure for us. Because of the modular structure. So we had maybe second and third year students as well sitting in the classes. And it has stayed around this number over the past 10 years, 150 to 200 students. So it's a large group. We're dealing with large group teaching, which is always a challenge, especially so in something like information literacy, where you have to be so hands-on and so practical, right? So it was a full collaboration with UCD librarians. Again, we were so lucky to be able to do this. They taught a lot of the sessions based on library resources and more besides. It was a great thing we did. And at the time, we were concerned about students' essay writing. Okay, I have no reason to believe that's changed. Certainly plagiarism was an aspect we were concerned about, and just their ability to use and harness academic resources. It was something that we were very concerned about. So we structured this module around this process of writing an academic essay, planning for researching. And the model I used at the time, it's pretty ancient now, but it was, some of you might know this, Stripling and Pitt's model of the research process. I'm going to talk about this. And the significance of it is this linear structure. Now, those of you who know about information literacy know how much these linear models are falling out of favour at the moment. And I will be talking about that it's step, 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 an iterative process where you start at the beginning and you go all through the steps and then you finish at the end and you produce a product, okay? Now, it's not really, it's not appropriate anymore, but this is the model I used at the time. Because, and I suppose this is the beauty of these models, is that it does allow you to break down the teaching that you want to do into steps and to structure it like that. So that's the advantage of it. And that's it, just so you can just see what I was using at the time. So you choose a topic, get an overview, narrow the topic, etc., etc. And you know the drill from, it's essay writing, it's project work, theses, all of these kind of things, the same kind of steps. We could sit here and criticize this now for the next 10 minutes. We don't have time. But, in reality, research is not like this. We bounce around from step to step. We do different things. But this is how we structured the module at the time, so Stripling and Pitts. Now, the instructional approach that I used, it's large group teaching, and I had 2 50-minute slots per week, which is standard. The large group teaching was the challenge, because I wanted to do practical stuff. Unfortunately, I was lecture-based. There was no We did introduce a session of hands-on computer labs in 2006, but the logistics of that were extremely difficult because obviously there was no computer lab, still isn't, that would take the full group at a time. So we had to split the students up into groups and book rooms, and it was logistically very difficult, but we did it. But the first year it was purely lecture based, which obviously not what you want, but we had to work around that. We had no live linking to the web in class, which was very difficult because we were talking a lot about specific resources. We wanted to do live demos, obviously we couldn't. So we were using screenshots to try and demonstrate resources like the library OPAC, for example, or different databases that were in use at the time. We just couldn't rely on the Wi-Fi because more often than not it would break down. So I did everything in hard copy. For example, I had a pre-test, an information literacy pre-test that was handed out. Students filled it in, handed it back, and a post-test then at the end. And all the assignments that we did were in hard copy as well. And each week I addressed a different step in the research process according to the Stripling and Pitts model. Well, maybe a slight variation of that, but kind of more or less that process. And that's how we did it. The assessment that I did at the time was individual assessment only. I had no group work because certainly the logistics of it. I suppose maybe a little bit of nervousness about doing group work with first years, which has been alleviated by technology. I'm going to talk about that. Okay, but at the time, nervousness, I think, is fair enough to say. So individual assessment only. The essay that they had to write, obviously that was the core, and then a reflective research journal, which I introduced because I wanted to understand the process of research rather than just the product, which is absolutely the core thing for information literacy, right? What did the students do to get to the end product? That's what I'm concerned about. Okay. I also had the hard copy, as I said before. Everything was submitted, so we had hundreds and hundreds of bits of paper, and I used paper worksheets because we couldn't demo the resources in class, so I had to let them go off and do that themselves, so paper worksheets to help them do that. I used PowerPoint slides and paper handouts as my primary learning tool. I used Blackboard, as I say, just to upload slides, to upload handouts, and to make announcements, maybe some email, but no interactive tools. I didn't use, obviously there's the blogging tool, the journal tool, all of those now. I didn't use any of those. I don't think they existed at the time. Again, I will confess, it was nervousness about this tool. You know, we didn't know Blackboard that well. We didn't know what it could do or what we were able to do with it. Couldn't assume that the students would be able to do it either. That's another thing I'm going to speak about. So maybe held back a little bit on that. And the readings that I set for the class were mainly print books, obviously, because ebooks weren't that widely available, and some links to websites or web pages. It's obviously changed a lot. And the original topics that I covered with the students, just to give you a quick overview, I won't go through them all, obviously, but you can see that very much focused on the process of researching an essay and writing an essay, and all of those things. Some of the topics have remained the same, but others, it's been a radical change in what we're doing now with the students. But just to give you an idea of how we were approaching it at the time. So, what has changed over the time? And I could ask the audience, but I'm going to just go through. I'm going to talk about these individually, but to me, these are the key factors that have influenced the way I teach and the way students learn. First of all is the understanding of information literacy as a concept and how that has changed. I'm just going to outline them first, then talk through them individually. Our expectations of students' baseline information and communication technology skills. What can we assume about the students when they come to us in third level? What can they do? What can we assume that they're able to do with technology? We can be comfortable with. The increased amount of personal viewpoint content on the web has certainly changed a lot of the way I approach information literacy teaching. A new emphasis over the past few years on the presentation and the conduct of self online, personal reputation management, how I appear online, protecting yourself online, all of those things. Collaboration. Everything now is about group work and working with student groups and students working together, just collaboration, and that to a great extent has been facilitated by improved technology and remote collaboration. The academic web, actually using the web for academic work. Can we? Should we? Should we advise the students to do it? Talk about that in a second. And Wikipedia, I find Wikipedia absolutely fascinating. Just as a, I suppose, a marker of how we understand the web as an academic resource and what we can do with Wikipedia. So that's been a huge part of that. The rise in popularity of visual media, particularly video for learning, it's huge. And the importance, finally, of reflective learning. That's not brand new, but I think there's a great emphasis on it now because of the, certainly, for example, the availability of blogging software has allowed us to explore that in a much greater way in our teaching. Okay, so let's just talk about them. How am I doing for time? Okay. Certainly information literacy has changed. Our understanding of it has changed. And it's now, I suppose the current way of thinking about it is as a social practice, that it's situated in real contexts, that it's not just something, kind of a generic model that you can stick on people. Somebody is information literate when they can do X, Y, and Z. It's simply not the case anymore. And a lot of this is due to the work of researchers like Christine Bruce in Australia, and her work with people and their individual understandings of information use and information literacy and what it means to be a good information user. And just being able to work in different contexts. So that's these references, by the way, are at the end of my presentation, so you can access them. An interesting article by Ellenberg, he talks about critical literacy, and that we need to move away from this kind of skills model-based, this rigid linear model-based of information literacy, to understanding that it is situated in particular, obviously in cultures. It's different in different cultures, just different situations. And it's based in the way, as you say, communities construct meaning and belonging. Understanding how to operate in different contexts as an information user. I think we could discuss it, but I think that's, and I've seen this reflected, it's kind of two things I've seen it reflected in most clearly over the past year or so. And that's first the revision of the ACRL information literacy standards. You should look at them. They were obviously very rigid, very linear. Now they're moving towards what are known as threshold concepts. And that's key concepts that a student, a third level student, should understand about their discipline, for example, when they come into higher education. And it's also reflected in that's ANSIL, a new curriculum for information literacy that was developed by Jane Secker and Emma Coonan in the UK. And I think it's extremely interesting. They have this similar idea of strands, key concepts that students should be able to, should be able to do in third level. And to me, that's most clearly. And then the second one is the inclusion of different aspects of information literacy, like information creation, like collaboration, like the presentation of self in online spaces, in definitions of digital literacy. And that's just one example there from JISC Infonet. The digital literacies in the centre, and then all different forms of literacy around that, like digital scholarship, communication, collaboration, media literacy. They're all coming in, they're crowding in to the space. So this is how the concept is changing. And we could debate about whether information literacy is still the most appropriate term to use. I talk about that with my students. Is it? I don't know. It's the most widely used. So from that perspective, it has an advantage. But perhaps we should be thinking about other terms and other phrases that might more accurately reflect what it is we're doing. Okay, so students' ITC skills. I think over the 10 years, there's been this gradual raising of our expectations of the baseline skills, that what can they do? When I started, I couldn't assume, for example, as crazy as it sounds, that students could use Word, could use the web, could use search engines. But now I pretty much can, because they all can. So I can do things with them that I couldn't do before. And that's just to point out that they can use them, but we shouldn't assume that they can use them effectively, because that's not always the case, okay? So we have to still be careful. But I think I feel more free in what I can ask the students to do now than I did 10 years ago. I can assume, for example, they could all use the VLE. The availability of personal viewpoint content on the web, like blogs, tweets, message boards, all of this stuff, this huge discourse, this conversation that's taking place online all the time. And this has raised serious questions in terms of how information is evaluated on the web and the importance of including that. And that's just a quote there. Students now prefer information sources that are more difficult to judge in terms of credibility, all of that kind of thing. So we have to deal with that. There's a new emphasis, as I said, on the presentation of self online. So we have issues like personal reputation management, looking at your digital footprint, how to generate content online, to be a contributor to the discourse. And just in 2004, this changed. Web 2.0 was all about this. The web was a platform for collaboration and discourse. Okay. The collaborative imperative. This for me has been significant in the assessment I do with the students. The shift from having to collaborate in face-to-face mode to being able to collaborate remotely and virtually. And this has really opened up the possibilities of what we can do with the students work together. And this has global ramifications. We should understand how the web works, how the web is this big collaborative enterprise, and that we should all be taking part, or could all be taking part if we choose. And this can start with the students and their learning. The academic web, we have to accept that students are going to turn to Google. They are going to look at ask.com. So do we ban this? Do we encourage it? I think the obvious answer is, we work with it. We educate them about how to do it properly. We don't just say you can't, because it's not going to happen anymore. So we have to accept that the web is used for academic work. And Wikipedia, I think this has been the gradual change. It's potentially acceptable. I no longer tell my students not to go to Wikipedia. I tell them to do it carefully. And this was reflected in a presentation at Lilac this year, which unfortunately I couldn't attend, but the slides are there. Wikipedia, it's not the evil elephant in the library reading room. We can use Wikipedia to teach students about how to evaluate information and how to create content and how to participate in the discourse with other online users, right? So it has all of these really positive aspects. The rise in visual learning media. I use a lot of video now with my students, YouTube video. It's all out there. Pretty good quality in a lot of cases. You can do that. 10 years ago, not so much. Now there's so much you can choose from. This expectation of students, I suppose changing the rules of engagement. Do we have to use everyday tools to support their learning? Do we have to use social media apps or gaming or all of these things or will the students be disengaged if we don't? This is the conundrum we're facing as instructors. So students increasingly expect their digital capabilities to be enhanced. They expect all of these things to be used in university, but they don't really understand how that's going to happen. They don't know how to use the personal devices to support their learning and their various other things they use. So perhaps it's up to us to figure out a way of integrating these things into our teaching. I won't spend too much time on that. You can look at that in the slides later. These are just some of the expectations students have about technology when they arrive on campus today. I'm sure you're familiar with some of these. Things like free Wi-Fi access, everything available online, everything accessible through the VLE, for example. So we have to deal with that too. And lastly, reflective learning. This increased interest in this idea of metacognitive or reflective learning, where students step back and look at how they're learning rather than just what they're learning. Okay, so I've only a minute left now, so I'm going to fly on a little bit, okay? Just the new module that we introduced, this won't take too long. Digital judgment, we can talk about the name in a second. Truth lies in the internet. We changed everything in 2012. We got rid of the old module and introduced this new one. And it was all focused on the digital world, digital media, online information. And the core concept is evaluation, being able to make intelligent decisions about information encountered online. We're taking the bull by the horns with this. This is what students are going to do. And these are some of the new topics that we're covering with the students. So you can see we've introduced a lot of things. We've Wikipedia in there. We've using the web for academic work. We have a whole section on digital your footprints and protecting yourself online and understanding yourself in the online space. All of those things. Very different to the topics we had. It's no longer structured around essay writing. It's about digital information. So what did I change? First of all, I now work with blended learning. So combining online and face-to-face modes and synchronous and asynchronous instruction. So the students are not just sitting in a classroom all the time, they're doing independent work. In particular, what we did was we introduced interactive e-tutorials to replace actual face-to-face lectures, and we're including more next year as well. And they were assessed on these too. And they also had to do a lot of independent learning, so looking at videos, looking at websites, interactive websites like the Internet Detective, that kind of thing. I threw away the step-by-step model, that's gone, and I have now a thematic structure that's broken down into weekly topics with particular tasks and readings that they have to do each week, like that. And that's based on this model here, which again, the reference you'll find at the end. And the learning task supports resources model. So for every unit, you have certain learning tasks that the students do. You have learning resources that support those tasks and allow them to perform those tasks. And then supports, which is the support you provide for them, the guidelines and directions that you provide for them in their learning. And that's on a weekly basis. So that's just to show you the 3 core teams that I introduced, broken down over the 12 weeks of the module. We started off with the digital world. We moved onto digital and academic literacy. And then the final unit was digital wisdom. And that was all about personal control and ethics in the digital world. And then within those folders there, I'll show you one example. That's in the digital world. Again, it's broken down into topics that we cover with them each week. So week 1, why digital judgment. Week 2, digital technology and information formats. And then week 3, evaluating digital information. So it's all broken down in a very structured way that's to guide the students. And just even within one of those folders, again, that's the weekly tasks that's from the unit on evaluating digital information. So they had to do a tutorial, they have some pre-reading, they have to look at a website, various things there, and we did that for each week. Just a few more things before I finish. The content is heavily, but not exclusively, obviously focused on web-based digital information, so the internet, I suppose, effectively. But we know we do obviously include other stuff too. It's not just about that, but it's primarily about that. I replaced individual coursework with a collaborative group project, which I think was a hugely significant change that we made, that they produce a digital resource guide in their groups, all online, with a reflective component built into that. Okay, I didn't put the link up, but I can send it. I have a link to some previous research projects that are on our website, our sales website, so you can have a look at some of the things they produced. They use social media tools a lot. So a lot of the projects were created with Tumblr or WordPress. They used Twitter, they used Facebook pages to build those guides. So it's been really interesting, the kind of things they've done. That's just their screenshots of one of our e-tutorials. And just some quotes from students before we finish, that students really, really like the e-tutorials. I don't know whether it's because they don't have to come to college or they can sit at home in their pajamas and do them, but they absolutely love them. And there's some of the comments that they made, that they really liked them, that it enhanced their learning. This was just the feedback from this year that we've just done. Don't use tutorials, use more online tutorials. So, okay, we're going to do that, we're doing more. So just very, very quickly, just the future. I want to change the title, I'm not that keen on it. We kind of developed it at the very last minute, so I'm going to change that. We are increasing the e-learning component. So we're working currently with one of our capstone project groups, the MLIS program. They're creating some new tutorials for us and revamping the existing ones, so we're going to introduce them. I feel more confident now about maybe doing some hands-on work in class with devices, so bring your own device approach. I think I can do that with the students. There's no problem there. So we're going to do that. And then I'm looking at maybe allowing students to make videos instead of creating a digital resource guide, just to, it's something a bit different, because it's obviously an interesting thing that the students are very visually motivated at the moment. So that's something we might do. So I think I've gone about a couple of minutes over time, I'm so sorry, but thank you all so much. And if you want any more information about any of this, please feel free to contact me at this email address. Thank you.